Hello,
Good.
welcome to the Godless Family webcast. I'm your host, Aubrey Adrianson, and with me today is my co-host, Amanda Hayes. Say hello, Amanda.
Hi there.
And with me today, I have two ex-Muslims. I have Hina Databoy and Marwa Bera, correct? Did I say those right?
Yes.
All right. And so today we are just trying to get a basic idea of what Islam is. Again, this is a family webcast, so I've asked my guests to, just kind of cover the basics and give parents things that they can say or summarize for their children when they ask about Islam as a religion. We'll also get into some of the reasons why Hina and Marwa left Islam uh, for non-belief. I won't assign labels to them. I'll let them do that. And so let's start with Hina. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I was born and raised in the United States as a Sunni Muslim. My parents got very religious when I was about 5 years old. We moved to London for a year when I was a child, and it left a very deep impression on me because the Muslims there, well, there's something else, and I'll just leave it at that for now. I came back to the United States as what I fondly refer to as a little fundamentalist or a little fundy. I was more religious than even my parents for a great deal of time. But even as I was going through that, the more I found out about Islam, the less I liked about it. And there were things in it that I thought didn't seem quite right, like some of the quote unquote science was not valid, and the stuff about gender really bothered me as well. But that wasn't enough to make me leave the religion. 9/11 was my second day of high school, so I spent my entire high school career trying to justify and defend my religion to my classmates, which meant that I had to research it a lot in order to find out what the answers to their questions were. By the time I was in college, I was already questioning a little bit, but two things happened that really changed my mind, and one was taking an intensive weekend-long Islamic seminar in which we were told to deconstruct our beliefs, but only to a certain point. And I thought, why not deconstruct it past that point? Because if it's the truth, no matter what I do, I'll end up back at the truth if it's actually real. And the other thing was taking a philosophy course where essentially I learned about the underpinnings of the theological system for Catholicism, the writings of Augustine, and I realized that Augustine made the exact same arguments as my religious teachers, yet somehow he ended up with Jesus as his savior, and we ended up with the Quran, and those two groups even kill each other over it. So by using the deconstructive approach, sort of thinking back at my beliefs, I came to the idea that had I not been born Muslim, I would not have accepted Islam as true. It just would not, I would not have bought it. It would not have made sense. And it was all downhill for a while after that, I guess. I was secretly an atheist for a while until I came out about 6 months into it to my family and the world, I guess. It didn't go so well for a while, but we've sort of come to a more resolved place now. And, that was a tough time, but really my life has gotten better since then.
Great. And Marwa.
I am Lebanese. I was actually born in the States, but was taken back to the Middle East at a very young age. I grew up between Saudi Arabia and Lebanon. I lived in Saudi in a sort of international expatriate community for 7 years, and then I went back to my parents' home country, Lebanon, and I stayed there through high school and college and grad school. Before ultimately moving back to the States, and I've been here for a couple of years. I practiced Shia Islam. My family was of the Shia Twelver division, which is the main sect of Shia Islam. I wore the hijab for 15 years, from the ages of 8 to 23. And I was practicing for much of my life until my late teens and early 20s were probably the where my skepticism kind of was taking over, and I was a closet atheist for, I guess, between 2 and 3 years, because I was kind of like shifting from being non-practicing Muslim and then being agnostic and then being an atheist. And so I did the whole double life thing, the praying and the fasting and the wearing hijab and so on, because I couldn't let anybody know what I truly believed until I could get out and come back to the States. And and now I run a blog that basically discusses all of this stuff. It's called Between a Veil and a Dark Place. And I am going to retire my website and move on to the Free Thought blogs soon. And I'm going to just continue that same work over there. So, yeah.
Great. So, Amanda, is there anything that you want to add before we start asking any questions?
No, I don't think so. I'm really excited to hear their stories.
Me too. And then we talked about this off air a little bit. I do know a little bit about Islam, very basic. I teach English as a second language, and the majority of my students are from Saudi Arabia. So I might have some very ignorant questions, and I want to ask them very purposefully because I want to put to you some of the ignorant questions that you would probably that a Muslim or an ex-Muslim might get, just because they are questions, and even though they might be ignorant questions, I think they're legitimate questions, and they should be asked. Things like common misunderstandings and things like that. But first I want to start with, what are the most basic beliefs of Islam? So what are the most basic ideas of Islam? And I'll let anyone take it.
I would say the one thing that does emerge as the very basics, in order to be technically considered a Muslim and have a shot at getting into heaven, you just have to declare your faith, which is that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and you can't refute that, like you can't repudiate that, rather. So if you make that statement and you never say, I take that back, you're considered a Muslim. Congratulations. And make it sound so simple, right? It really isn't. I mean, you're supposed to practice your beliefs as well. But that's the very basics. And so Islam has a very strong fixation on the concept of oneness, that God is one, that Christians are actually pagans because they think God is three. And that a big part of that is because Islam did arise out of a pagan society. So Islam sort of had this monotheistic backlash built into it.
Yeah, I think I'd add to that in addition to the oneness of God being the most fundamental tenet of Islam, the sort of attributes attached to this one God include omnipotence and omni-goodness, and we say this sort of statement, in the name of God, most merciful, most beneficent, is something that is very common in Islam. But basically all of these omni qualities that are attributed to God, and not only a one God, but a one God as a creator and a master of the universe and all life and all mankind. It's very similar to a lot of monotheistic beliefs, as you could say.
Okay, so going off of that, one of the things that I hear from my family actually is that Muslims, they have their God Allah, and it's the wrong God. Well, and what do you say to that?
Well, I'm an Arab, and the word Allah in Arabic literally means the God. And I'm from Lebanon, where we have, I guess, between 20 and 30% of the population is actually Christian or from other non-Muslim sects, and they do refer to God as Allah. Even the Christians do. The God mentioned in the Arabic version of the Bible is Allah. It is. I think it is fundamentally the same concept of God. I think what differs are the trappings attached to that, the practices within the religion, the other extraneous beliefs. So yeah, I do think it is a misconception when people say that the God of Islam is fundamentally different than the God of other monotheistic faiths.
Exactly. Islam and Christianity are both spin-offs of, Judaism. They're all Abrahamic faiths, as it were. And as much as a lot of the fundamentalists don't like to admit it, they have a lot of bizarre similarities. Not necessarily bizarre in the sense that you wouldn't expect it because they come from the same place, but bizarre in their specificity sometimes. So as much as they'd like to deny it, and I hope they keep denying it, because if they all join up, we're in trouble. It is the same God, unfortunately or fortunately.
Well, and you were kind of saying in the pre-show, Hina, that if you weren't born where you were born, that you probably wouldn't have believed the whole, idea or thought about becoming a Muslim. So I also think that it really depends on where you're born determines who you think the true God is.
It's absolutely true that most people are born into, live out, and die within the same faith.
One
Yeah.
thing you said, Hina, I wanted to get to today, but since you brought it up, I want to kind of just go ahead and go there. The specificity, my pronunciation's off. One thing I find really interesting about the parts of the Quran that I've read compared to parts of the Bible that I've read is how incredibly specific the Quran is when compared to I guess Christian doctrine. Judaism is also quite specific. They have, I think, 613 commandments total. But what I find interesting about the Quran is there's rules for, doing business, rules for if you want to divorce your wife, which is, it's the only religion I know of that even has guidelines for if you want to divorce your wife, and it seems like an attempt by the Arabs of that time to really structure society in a very specific way. And what do you think about that?
There is sort of this narrative that before Muhammad, they were all a bunch of squabbling tribes, and then they all came together under the banner of Islam. Now, whether or not that's historically true, I can't really speak to it, and there's not enough research, I think. But that's kind of the narrative that's told. So you're definitely right in that there's a lot of specific rules and laws, because Muhammad wasn't just starting a religion. He was starting a society. He was starting almost a mini nation state that eventually ended up becoming this empire that we all hear about in history. So yeah, you're absolutely right on that.
Marwa, do
Yeah,
you want to
I
weigh
think,
in?
I'm sorry.
No,
I mean,
sorry, I was going to ask you to go ahead and speak. Go ahead.
I think there's almost no doubt that Islam does view itself as not just a religion or a creed or ideology, but also a way of life, and that it does govern the almost the minutest details of your dress and your and what you will eat and how you will travel and where and how you will worship while you travel and your business and your marriage. I think that's actually viewed as one of the benefits, is one of the strengths of Islam, from within, that it doesn't leave anything up in the air, that it gives you a sort of structure for dealing with everyday matters.
Okay, great. Thank you. Steve asked a question, and we talked about this pre-show, and we're going to save that for last, Steve, so hold on to that question, if you could, please. Are there any important differences among some of the different sects of Islam, and what are they? And just for the sake of time, because I'm sure there's numerous, I just pick a couple important ones.
I guess I'll start since I'm the one with the Sunni background, and we were first. Well, technically speaking, yeah. There's Shia and Sunni, and Marwa is Shiite, or comes from a Shiite background, so she can speak more to that. But it started off as a political division, really, essentially, and it sort of became a theological division over time. Sunnis constitute the majority of Muslims in the world. Even the subsects of it are usually Sunni. Wahhabism, which is the dominant sect in Saudi Arabia, which is where you see a lot of the fundamentalism coming out of, is very much Sunni. And Sunni essentially just comes from the word sunnah, which means following the Prophet. So, Sunnis claim that they're the ones who are actually doing what Muhammad did, but of course Shiites think that they are doing that too. But yeah, Shiism is, well, I don't want to speak to it again. That's Marwa's domain. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So we are from the branch of Shia Islam, which
Oh no. She froze, so we'll give her a minute to come back. There she is.
Am I not here?
You
Am I
froze
here?
for a second. You froze for a second. Can
All
you
right.
start over? Oh no. Her connection was so good for a while.
Yeah.
And I would agree, but that,
Okay.
I would contend that this sort of political division was not theological, because I do think
Oh.
Oh, man.
She's probably saying some really good stuff
theological
too.
I know.
are
I really
almost
want to hear
inseparable
it.
in many forms of Islam. Is short for translate into me. Am I not here?
You keep going in and out.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna hang up and join again, see if that helps.
You keep cutting in and out, Marwa.
Okay. All right. And what we will do is chat about something else in the meantime.
Okay.
And this ties into the last question. So, Hina, why is the Prophet Muhammad so important? And
Well, he's considered to be the completer of revelation. So in Islam, there was revelation to all the different prophets. There was Moses and Jesus and Adam and Noah, all those prophets, not all of them from the Old Testament, but many of them show up in Islam. And the idea is that they were revealed Islam, but then their version of Islam became corrupted by the people of their time, that it was changed, that the revisions were wrong and all this stuff. And Muhammad comes along with the Quran, which Muslims are very attached to this idea that it's unchanged, that it was written down and nobody has changed it since then. So Muhammad completed the revelation, and he is considered to be, because of that, the most honorable man, and he has all these attributes that are associated with him, being the most trustworthy, the most honest. And there's stories of his life even before he was a prophet that allegedly his community saw him as very honest and very sincere. And so he was considered to be the carrier of this final message, and it's considered to be the message for all humanity. So Islam recognizes that the messages given to Moses were really just for the Jews, or whatever prophet received whatever revelation, it was just for their society. Muhammad is supposed to be the completion of revelation for all humanity forever.
okay.
So that's why he's considered important. And there is something of sort of a reverence for him that Muslims have, because he's considered to be perfect and the best. Although a lot of Sunni Muslims are very, I don't know how it is with Shia Muslims, but I know there's a lot of wariness about over-revering Muhammad, because you're not supposed to worship him. He's not Jesus, to what Jesus is to Christians anyway. You're not supposed to worship him. But there is a very deep sort of respect and reverence for him in Islam.
Would you like to add to that, Marwa? We were talking about Muhammad and the importance of Muhammad.
Yeah, and I think that does kind of play into the difference between the Sunnah and the Shia. So the Shia do consider Muhammad to be a very important figure, but he's not the only one within Islam. Actually, Shia is short for Shi'at Ali, which basically the word Shia means partisan, partisans of Ali. Who was Ali? Ali was considered the first Imam among Shia Muslims. Ali was the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, and he also married the Prophet Muhammad's daughter. So all of the living descendants of the Prophet Muhammad actually are also descendants of Ali, because he only had this one daughter. So what's going on here, with this sort of division, is that it started off as a political division, but it didn't remain that way. At first, it was just a sort of contention over who would lead the Muslims, who would become the caliph after Muhammad died. But the Shia believed that Ali and then the other 11 Imams that followed, that's why the main sect of Shia Islam is called Twelver Islam, Twelver Shia Islam, that these 12 Imams are actually, they're actually infallible, that they are guiding the next generations of Muslims forward into into greater enlightenment and into following these rules, and they are to be revered almost as much as Muhammad is, but of course none of them more than human beings. They're infallible, they're almost on the level of prophets. The only difference between them and prophets is that the Islam is considered to be complete, the revelation is complete, and then they're there to guide people into applying it properly. So yeah.
Okay. So then, so then we in the West we hear all about, you can't insult the prophet, and so this gets into the Dra Muhammad Day thing, that the question that Steve asked, and this is kind of a strange thing to us in the West, because um, I could insult Jesus if I wanted to, or Moses, or God even, and not face any kind of persecution. No one's going to rush to my house and drag me out and kill me. So what happened? Why is Muhammad so untouchable? Or is this a culture thing?
Well, I mean, I would first say that you can insult Muhammad without being dragged out of your house and killed. You live in the United States.
Right, right.
So, that's the first thing I would point out, is that, that's important to recognize. It's where you are as well. It wasn't so long ago that you couldn't insult the Bible or Jesus and not be persecuted. Islam is, I'm not saying it's the right thing. It's obviously a messed up and wrong thing, and we live in a time when free speech is very important. But Islam, in a lot of ways, is still kind of an angry toddler in comparison to Christianity in terms of its development. And you add to that the history of backlash and anger against the West that many Muslim countries have. Many Muslims in many countries feel that the United States and Europe have been persecuting them for a long time, that Muslim blood is cheap, that the bombs are raining down constantly, the embargoes are always in place. Israel, they see as this sort of enemy that's been planted there by the United States and by European countries. And so to them, this is kind of a way to be angry about something that they see as part of that. They see it as sort of this Western conspiracy to eradicate Islam and insult Muslims. And this is, by the way, explanation is not justification. Because even when I was a Muslim, when the Muhammad cartoons thing broke, I thought it was completely stupid and it made Muslims look bad. And I actually spoke up about it and was ostracized. But I thought, I've always thought that it makes you look worse when you react like that to something like that. And especially in a Western context, like you mentioned, people can insult Jesus all they want. But yeah, that's, I guess, some of the background to that.
Okay. Marwa?
I was in the Middle East when the Muhammad cartoons, the Danish cartoons happened. A lot of people didn't. I mean, there was storming of the embassies. There was a lot of anger that kind of was displayed on the media. But one thing that we didn't see was that there were other, more moderate groups who felt hurt by it, were insulted by it, and instead opted to go to the mosque together and light candles and read supplications and traditions about Muhammad and think about what he meant to them. So there's that aspect of it. But I do think that the reason it might seem to be so such a grave matter to Muslims. I know that I was still a practicing Muslim when it happened, and I know that I felt that I had been personally insulted because I felt that I had a personal love for the person of Muhammad. It was as if someone had written, drawn derogatory cartoons about my father or my uncle, and I no longer hold that view, and I no longer think that that is any sort of justification for people being quiet about this. And in fact, I myself have not. I haven't done anything in line with the whole drawing Muhammad cartoon day, but I don't think that this is some sort of petty, it necessarily has to be some sort of petty attempt to insult Muslims or get them riled up. I think it is a free speech matter, and I think for many of us, especially ex-Muslims who have been silenced, who have never been able to speak our, the way we think, feel about religion, about God, about the person of Muhammad. For many of us who have been forced to basically follow the rules of Muhammad, and they extend it down to the the minutest details of our everyday lives. Remember, we've been controlled by this. I think reclaiming that by showing that we can, we can say whatever we want and we can say how we truly think about Muhammad and other figures in Islam and about the Quran. I think that is a very powerful thing, and that's why I'm not in a position to condemn this Dra Muhammad Day movement thing.
Anyone want
Yeah,
to?
I mean, I definitely, in terms of Draw Muhammad Day specifically, I neither participate it nor condemn it because I feel like for a lot of people it is a way to express their freedom of speech and all that. My wariness about it really comes from some of the images that I've seen people produce that seem a way to sort of express xenophobia instead of criticism of Islam.
Yeah.
There seem to be some people are sort of under the guise of, oh, I'm criticizing Muhammad, are sort of drawing these racist caricatures
Yeah.
which don't just insult the prophet but really insult any person who isn't white in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I sort of, without condemning it, I tend to keep a step back from it because to me every day is Criticize Islam Day, right? I don't need to draw Muhammad on this one day.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said, I know quite a few Muslims, some very fundamental, some not so much, and they're humans. I mean, just like any of us, with dreams, hopes, aspirations, feelings, and um, I highly criticize their religion, but I don't want to do anything to attack them and make them feel attacked. So I think I have the same reservations about it that you do when I think about them. You know, are you criticizing Islam or are you just trying to hurt people's feelings? What are you trying to accomplish? If you're trying to raise awareness and get the global community to criticize Islam and to think more critically about Islam, then great. If you're just trying to show hatred towards Muslims or Arabs or anyone brown, like you said, Hina, then I think then you're wrong, and you need to stop. So I agree with you, ladies, on that.
And I mean, I would like to say that anti-Muslim bigotry is a huge problem, and it does exist. It is a huge problem, and I don't think it's a coincidence that most bigotry that is basically expressed towards Muslims is done in racializing manners, and it's just a sort of like any small affiliation towards Muslims or Islam ends up being spoken about in racializing ways, even if brown person, white converts are spoken about in terms of having, in terms of having entered insular communities that then sort of hijacked their values and overtook their white values with these sort of, these sort of tight-knit, brown hubs of seduction and theft. And then you have something like, that doesn't even involve Islam at all, like the present Miss United States, the present Miss America, who was, there were so many anti-Arab and anti-Muslim slurs given, sent her way when she is neither of those things. And so just the way that Muslims are depicted and spoken about is done in very, very racializing ways, and it does do good to be aware of that when we do attempt to critique Islam.
That's something that bothers me. Being in Michigan, we have one of the largest Arab and Muslim populations in the United States. Most of them are Lebanese.
Yeah.
And a lot of people also don't know this. Michigan is, I consider it to be one of the most racist states in the North. Our cities, even our small cities, are heavily segregated. Our schools are still heavily segregated. So I do hear a lot of racist remarks towards Arabs, and it's so frustrating for me because I feel like, I'm in the middle and I have to, yes, that's about Islam. That's a good point. You make a good point about Islam, but this person is, this is still a person, and why are you attacking this person? They have done nothing to you. And then just trying to, deal with the racist comments, especially from, family members, is extremely frustrating and difficult. And it's all hate. It has nothing to do with who they are as a person. I'm rambling. I'm sorry.
That's all right, but I was going to say that the vitriol you're describing, like the racism and the sort of off-color remarks, no pun intended, really end up diluting the legitimate criticism. Because if you're just constantly being hit with these things that are clearly not legitimate, you can hear legitimate criticism that's actually theological and not racist, and just dismiss it out of hand. And, you know, it can be a problem when you're dealing with a population of Muslims that's already so defensive, especially post 9/11 in the U.S. You have a defensive population, you're inundating them with all this, and, you know, it's come to the point where, you know, I can get accused of being an Islam apologist by some people, and then Muslims turn around and call me a Zionist agent. You know, so it's tough for me to be able to sort of make thoughtful criticisms of Islam when you have people just yelling all kinds of weird slurs like towel head and thinking that that's some sort of criticism of Islam.
Right, and I think what I was trying to get at before I lost my train of thought is when I hear those remarks, what I try to do for the person making the remark is to separate. This is about Islam. This is a hate statement about this person and about their color. Do you see the difference? And they don't hear it. You know, it's incredibly frustrating talking about religion and race with people. So my heart goes out to a lot of the Arabs and Muslims in the United States. I've seen the racism, and you know, there's not a lot you can do except keep trying to have those conversations. So I know I took us off track a little bit. Does anyone want to say anything else before I move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to note that even as far as it goes, you know, even going as far as to trying to, you know, discuss Islam and critique Islam, even within that, even if you don't use deliberately racializing language, there are some, you know, blanket statements and generalizations are also things that don't do anybody good. You know, if we're thinking about critiquing Islam, we're obviously thinking about doing it because it's going to serve some sort of purpose or function, and it's hard to see how blanket statements such as, you know, Islam is evil or whatever, you know, serve any sort of productive purpose or function. And that also plays into the concept of talking about Islam as if it's some sort of monolith, as if, you know, all Muslims think or practice or believe or endorse the same set of values, and they don't. I mean, there's, you know, an incredible amount of variety in the ways in which Muslims believe and practice and structure their cultures and their theocracies and their sort of social religious codes, and the Islam that I grew up with, you know, between Beirut and then South Lebanon, is a very, very specific sort of
Maybe she'll come back.
guerrilla warfare, Hezbollah, South Lebanese Shia culture.
All right, so yeah, I think the point she was trying to make was essentially that Islam is not monolithic.
Right.
You know, that there's different forms of it, and saying Islam thinks this or Islam did that, you know, is not necessarily the most helpful, and you have to look at it contextually. Mm-hmm. It's why you get ridiculous people telling me of all people, that no ex-Muslim can be out because they're just going to die. Because I was angry because there was an article that was written and the reporter didn't consult any ex-Muslims about it, and ex-Muslims would have been the perfect people to consult about it. And when I tweeted about it, I got someone saying, that's because ex-Muslims are all hiding and scared. And, you know, I replied saying, hello, I exist. So it's not exactly productive to approach things in that way, I think, as if everything's the same all the time.
Right. You know, we get that when we start talking about Christianity as well. And it's something I never thought about before until recently. You know, it's one of those things, you know that there are many different kinds of Christians, there's many different varieties of Christianity, but until someone says it, you're like, oh yeah, there are many different types of Christians and many different types of Muslims. And
I think it's a little more difficult with Islam, though, because most people don't know any Muslims, let alone many Muslims. So with Christians, at least, you know, they might say, oh, Christianity does this, but they don't treat Christians that way because they know enough, there's enough of a critical mass where they know every Christian isn't, you know, shooting gay people on sight. Whereas if you don't know any Muslims, it's really easy to buy into the monolith and then use that to determine your behavior.
I agree. I think in the United States, there's that extra problem of we kind of think of Muslims as being over there. And so a lot of Americans don't know Muslims, don't know anything about Arab countries or Arab cultures, and it's very easy to separate and generalize when you have kind of this mental and physical wall of separation. You're back, Marwa.
I am back. I am back. I'm really glad you made that point about othering, because I really feel like, it's possible to understand, Muslim cultures and not view them as some sort of, strange otherworldly thing, and you just need to, discuss them in their specificity on their own terms, and that's why I have encountered this problem of people thinking of Muslims as over there, some sort of other thing, when there are so many similarities between, the customs of family and togetherness, and even, among fundamentalism and extremism. You can understand Christian fundamentalism and extremism within your own country. Why can't you understand it somewhere else? And that's why, like, in one of my blogs, it was about what it was like to grow up in Hezbollah culture, and I drew parallels between what I've seen of Christian fundamentalism here in the Midwest and what I saw growing up in Hezbollah, and they are very, very similar.
That's from my studies of Christianity and my studies of Islam, I find them to be extremely similar. And one of the things, and I've said this already, one of the major differences I see between Christianity and Islam is really the specificity of Islam, of the Quran.
Yeah.
But getting into that, let's get into dress, because that is one of the things that's very, very specific to Islam. I mean, in the Bible, there's a little bit about dress. There's one chapter, one verse, I believe it's Corinthians, about women having to cover their hair. But in the Quran, it appears a couple of times, and one thing I find interesting about that is I know, like I said, I know quite a few Lebanese Muslims, and I grew up with this idea from the Lebanese that it never says anywhere in the Quran that you're supposed to cover your hair. It just says you're supposed to dress conservatively. And I was doing some research about the hijab, and I found that that's actually not true. There is some specific language about that, and I want to know if you guys could talk about that.
Well, first of all, Corinthians isn't the only place. Paul also says, cover your head in church or your head be shaved.
Okay.
Yeah, so there is that. I mean, covering the head is something I think that in Europe was sort of reserved for the wealthy. In European cultures, it's something that, that's what the upper class women would cover themselves. But in any case, to bring it back to what we're talking about, I've heard women say things like that because there's verses of the veil say, cast your garments over your bosoms and guard your modesty. And so some people will say, oh, that just means you have to wear a shawl, cover up your cleavage. But from what I've heard from Arab speakers, and Marwa, maybe you can get into this a little bit more, the garment that they're talking about covering over your chest is a garment that covers your head.
Yeah, I mean, I've also heard the whole, the Quran actually doesn't say anything specific about veiling. I'd like to, remind, kind of a reminder that most of the fatwas are the sort of rulings that come from Islamic authority.
If we get her back, I'm going to have her start over.
Yeah. But I guess I could talk a little bit more about
traditions of spoken religion.
Marwa, you we lost you for a minute. Can you start over? I really want to hear everything that you have to say.
Sure. I was saying
and now my
that
internet is not good.
Yeah, I'm sorry about all of this. So I was saying that. So I have heard that you
That's
can
okay.
interpret those Quranic verses as not being, about covering the hair, but the fact remains that most mainstream scholars, most scholars with any influence, most of the norms structuring, societies in which Muslims live, do consider it as a requirement. Not only, given one interpretation of those Quranic verses, but also in addition to the spoken traditions, that hadith, that are also taken as references when scholars decide to issue fatwas regarding what women should or should not do. Um, and, I do think, even with that, there is a variety. There's some variation between the levels of expected modesty from one Muslim culture to another. I know that within Shia Islam, it's largely frowned upon to.
All right. So I guess I could talk a little bit more about some of the varieties in terms of covering yourself. Um, okay. Marwa, you might want to disconnect because it's sort of shaky. It keeps cutting back to you. But in any case, when it comes to covering oneself, there's some differences. There's some women who cover their heads, there's some who cover their faces. Generally, it's accepted by Muslims that covering your head is required. That's a generally true thing. Even some women who don't cover their heads will say, well, I'm supposed to.
Okay.
And did she say that it was because of the way scholars had interpreted and issued a rule? It doesn't say that specifically in the Quran? I'm not sure I follow that.
Okay, well, the Quranic verse, within my understanding and within I think most Muslims' understanding, it does mandate covering the head. That it says cast your garments over your bosoms, and that means the garment that covers your head, don't tuck it back, make sure it covers you properly, quote unquote, and guard your modesty. And there are explicit verses about not striking your feet on the ground and making your ornaments jingle.
Okay.
So, if you're wearing kind of jewelry, if you strike your feet hard on the ground, men might be able to hear your jewelry jangling. So that's considered to be seductive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And also your voice is considered to be part of your modesty. If your voice is too soft and sweet, like if you're singing, God forbid, that might be too seductive for men, so you're supposed to speak to men in harsh tones and not sound sweet and becoming.
Wow.
Yeah. And then there's a lot more from Muhammad's sayings. Muhammad said that if a woman walks by a group of men and they smell her perfume, she's an adulteress.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a lot of parallels between some of the ideas that people have here about men just not being able to control themselves around women.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was on a panel with Rebecca Goldstein this past weekend, and she was talking about how her sister had the voice of an angel but wasn't allowed to sing because her family is very strict Jewish. And we had a really good conversation about that because, apparently that was one of the weird parallels that I talked a little bit about earlier.
Wow, yeah, okay.
But every country does it a little bit differently too, You see the full face veils and all black more in Saudi Arabia because they think that wearing colors is too flashy for women. Whereas you go to Pakistan and some women do wear a headscarf, but a lot of them just wear a shawl wrapped loosely over their heads. Most of my female Muslim relatives don't cover their heads. A slim majority, but a majority nonetheless. Sorry.
Are they relatives? I'm sorry. Are they relatives that live in the United States?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But even the ones in other countries, like wearing the full proper headscarf the way that I did, was not terribly common in the community or in the family.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen the headscarf worn a number of different ways. I've seen it where it goes around the head and then back here, but does not come down over the neck. So they just it really only covers their head.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen it where it comes down.
Yeah.
Here, I've seen the veil across the nose and mouth, and then I've seen women actually cover up their eyebrows as well. And yes, I've seen quite a great deal of variation, and I do think that is cultural, depending on, like, in most of the Muslims I know are Saudi, like I said, and I think it just depends on whether they're from the city, which is considered more liberal, or from the country, which is considered more conservative parts of Saudi Arabia.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's so many factors too. There's also sort of level of, I hesitate to use the term, but there's really no other. Level of religiosity does play a role as well. You know, some people get really into it. Like I have relatives who don't wear normal clothes. They wear normal clothes and then they put a robe on top of that to give that double layer, and then they have the scarf trailing down. And then, like you said, there's some people who tuck the tails of the scarf back, and then I've seen women who are wearing practically cat suits, you know, skin tight, head to toe covered, but it's skin tight. And, you know, I used to look at those women with a lot of disdain because I didn't wear a robe, I didn't go that far, but I did wear very loose skirts, no slits, ankle length, and then very long tunics with that, and then I'd wear a scarf with the tails down so that any of my chest that was showing from even all those layers would be obscured. And I didn't wear makeup, and I didn't wear, you know, flashy jewelry, and I didn't wear perfume, and, you know, I did my best, I guess. And so I'd look at these women with their makeup and perfume and tight clothes and the scarf, and I'd go, what are you even doing? But,
why the scarf at this point?
yeah, but for them, I guess it's a show of identity, and it's a show of faith, and, you know, okay, whatever they want to do, I guess. I'm not going to be the fashion or body police.
Right. So let's turn that over to men. So we talked about some of the clothing requirements for women. What about clothing requirements for men?
Men are okay, so satar is a term that means essentially your private parts that nobody is supposed to see, besides maybe your spouse. And for men, it's from the navel to the knee. So a lot of Muslim men don't follow this, but if they're really practicing Muslims, their shorts will always go below their knees. So if you ever see a bunch of Muslim guys and their shorts are below their knees, they're not trying to be gangster or anything. They're trying to be religious. We call them the Muslim shorts. Even my little brother has pairs of them. My mom will find long shorts for him, and she'll say, oh, I found some Muslim shorts at the store, so I bought you one in each color. Yeah, so they do have that requirement. They're also not so much, I say the policing is less of their clothing and more of where they look. Muslim men are advised to lower their gaze. So if they see a woman, who's not related to them, who they find attractive, if they look at her and that first glance is okay because they accidentally looked at her, but after that they're supposed to look down at the ground and not at her. So their modesty, I guess, is more in where they're looking rather than how they're presenting themselves to be viewed.
And welcome back, Marwa. As Muslims and as ex-Muslims, how do you feel about these clothing requirements? I mean, as a Westerner, I know how I feel, but I'm a Westerner and I was born and raised in the United States.
I have to say that going topless is pretty great. Well, that's what my cousins call it. When they say taking their scarf off, they're like, oh, I'm topless, so, you know. Very silly. But,
yeah,
you know.
It's okay. So with me, I did wear the hijab for 15 years, for far too long. I started far too early. I do not believe it is a thing that should be imposed upon children. I do believe it is a matter of bodily autonomy, and that if someone wants to wear the hijab, then they have to be able to give informed consent to it. I don't believe a child is capable of doing that. I don't wear the hijab anymore, you know, not only because I'm not a Muslim, but the reason, you know, one of the what severe issue I took with the ideology of the hijab. I mean, for me, it was, oh, women have to limit, you know, their interactions, the things that they can do, their physical bodies, interact publicly. They have to place all of these limitations on themselves just in order not to tempt men, rather than putting the onus on men to control themselves. And I do believe that even with the, you know, with the provisions for both men and women to lower their gaze, I think that on other people not to harass and trans themselves and their bodies. And so I do believe that it's fundamentally flawed, because I think that of discord that needs to get objectifies the hypersex, because it considers even things such as your hair and your neck and your ears as temptation. And when children are treated that way, and child limbs and child ears and child hair is considered as some sort of temptation to the world that must be covered up, I think that's where it becomes, a serious problem. Even more than it is when women who voluntarily want to view themselves that way go out and view themselves that way.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree that, it's when it's put upon children, because I started probably around the same age as you, Marwa. I was 8. And it sort of weirdly hypersexualizes you to be an 8-year-old and thinking, oh, I have to cover myself. And you're not really taught necessarily that it's, because men have sexual urges, but you are taught that you're tempting in some way.
Yeah.
And you don't understand sexuality, you don't understand men or your own body, and yet you're somehow supposed to conceive of yourself as this thing that could cause bad things to happen. And it's a really crappy way to sort of grow up with your body. And it didn't help that, I grew up a fat kid in America, so everyone was telling me how ugly I was and how repulsive I was, and yet I was supposed to cover myself because then men would want to rape me. So it was this weird conflict of ideals that just never quite gelled and caused me a lot of angst growing up, definitely.
And it's really difficult when you're a kid and you don't understand what's going on and why it's such a problem if an inch of your wrist kind of shows because your sleeve fell down a little bit. You have to, every time you're out buying clothes, if you want to wear jeans or pants, you have to wear a tunic that basically goes down to your ankles over it, because you don't understand what it means, because you don't understand what it means. You don't understand why a backside or legs are considered so contentious, and especially the terminology surrounding it. In Arabic, the word fitna is used to describe the woman's body. They say a woman's body is fitna. The word fitna...
The word fitna means civil war or strife. Just to clarify.
Yeah, it means strife. It means sedition. That's what it means. It means a little bit of it means that things are it means that you're sowing discord from within.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard people say that the reason a lot of mosques in England do not have women's sections, and the reason they'll give is that it's because it's fitna, because having women around just causes strife and discord.
Yeah.
And
so they're not even allowed in the mosque?
In some places, yeah. In the United States, I say most mosques do have a women's section, but in England, it's very uncommon.
Huh.
They're also very, very conservative over there. But yeah, to get back to the covering thing, like I said, it was really weird for me to be... I mean, how confusing it is when you're so young and you don't understand sexuality, and yet you're supposed to cover yourself up because of sex. When you do find out what that temptation is and what that sex is, it can be even more befuddling, because if you're growing up in the West as a Muslim, if you have this young covered body, nobody considers you sexually attractive. Nobody will. And so there's this sort of weird conflict that goes on. I mean, I remember my grandmother yelling at me because I was running because I was late to class and she could see my ankles.
What I find disturbing, and I'm assuming that you will all agree, the tremendous amount of responsibility that's placed on women to curb men's sexual appetite. That it's all the women's responsibility not to be raped or not to be desired, as if men have no control and no responsibility at all for what they do to a woman based on whether or not they desire her. And what I find interesting is rapes still happen in these fundamentalist Muslim countries to women who are completely covered. It's not doing anything to prevent rape, and it's a frustrating thing for me as a feminist and as a Westerner and a non-fundamentalist to just even see someone wearing the hijab. It's one of those things that just grinds on me.
Well, I mean, on one hand, I do have to address sort of how I felt about the hijab, which, yes, I had all these conflicted feelings, but in the end, I felt that it was my show of devotion to God, that it was my show of modesty, it was my show of faith, and it was also, I felt, a way to throw a big middle finger at Western beauty norms. Because I saw these women around me dieting, starving, purging, binging. I grew up with Killing Us Softly. Jean Kilbourne came to my middle school. All these media images, buy this bikini, get a bikini body. Right now that season has started, right? When, your body is supposed to be a bad body unless it looks perfect. So I saw it as sort of a way to flip the bird at all of that and focus on my mind instead of my body. So I mean, not every single Muslim woman is walking around thinking, I'm covering because men might rape me if I don't. So I thought that's important to sort of consider. But you're right, though, there is, at its core in Islam, it's supposed to prevent men from lusting after you and therefore rape, which is, we all know, completely stupid because rape is generally not a crime of lust. It is a crime of power. It is a crime of a man feeling that he has a right to do whatever he wants to a woman's body, or a woman feeling the right to do that to anybody's body. Rape is not necessarily men on women, but since it's the one that's germane here, I'll stick to that. But just last night, there's this guy on Twitter who said that if you feminists are so concerned with rape, how come I can see your cleavage? And I pointed out that women in countries where pants would be considered immodest, where they're covered from head to toe, still rape happens because it's all about that power and control and all that. He said, well, he had no response to that.
And it's not just that rape happens. I'll send you a link afterwards of the Global Rape Index. Muslim majority countries are among the countries with the highest rape indexes worldwide. Sexual harassment, street harassment is pandemic in Egypt, which has a very conservative Muslim population. I think it's in the high 90s. I'm not sure what the number is, but the stark majority of women have been harassed on the street. It's a common thing. Saudi Arabia, where by law you have to cover everything, has one of the highest rape indexes in the world. And I think that does, it's not just that, the hijab or covering up doesn't prevent it. I think it plays into it. I think it plays into it fundamentally because it makes sex not a matter of consent. It makes it so that you think about sex in such a way that consent is not even a factor. I know that within many sort of mainstream versions of Islam, sex is considered a right to the man. Marital rape is not a crime in most versions of Islam, and when sex is considered something that is a right that men have and something that women give up, then the way it's viewed is that if the desire isn't there, the sex isn't going to happen. But if the desire is there, then the sex is going to happen, and it's almost deserved. So the desire is sort of the hinging point as to whether sex or rape is going to happen, and not consent. Consent isn't even considered one of the main considerations, let alone a consideration at all.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that was the other way around.
It's definitely male desire there. Female desire isn't even a thing, and that used to bother me in Islam too, that it seemed like sexuality, when it was talked about, it was, you men prevent your lust, you women try to prevent men's lust, and I'm like, wait a second, then how come I have a sex drive? Come on, guys.
Those elements are present in fundamental
about my puberty.
Well. Right, those elements are present in fundamental Christianity as well. Even in the United States, gosh, I want to say maybe 75 years ago, maybe even as little as 50 years ago, there was also no such thing as marital rape.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, I think there was a trial in the 60s or 70s where a woman tried to convict her husband of rape, and he even videotaped him raping her, and she still lost in court. So it's still an issue here as well. I just think it's more pronounced in Muslim countries because of the dress code and the strict prescription for how you should behave. I think it just stands out more, but it's definitely an issue here as well.
Aubrey, were you saying? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying that I do know in the U.S. it's only been about 30 years since marital rape was criminalized in all 50 states. And in Muslim-majority countries, almost no Muslim-majority countries have criminalized marital rape or have considered it to be something that is justifiably a crime.
Good.
Yeah, because the idea with an Islamic marriage contract is that the man has to provide financially for the woman, and the woman has to be sexually available to him, and that is essentially at heart of the Islamic marriage contract. There's no real room for consent or anything else.
Wow. Amanda?
You said, Aubrey, the case that you were talking about marital rape, you said that was from the 70s?
It was either the 60s or 70s. I learned about it in college, and I don't know all the details, but I might be able to find it.
I was just going to say, I literally just retweeted something today about a case like that where a woman brought criminal charges against her husband who repeatedly drugged and raped her throughout their marriage, and he was looking at, I think, 25 to life, and the judge ended up just giving him 8 months of like house arrest, which was ridiculous because he admitted he had videos of him raping her and drugging her, and he even admitted in court that he drugged her because it made her more interesting, and so he wasn't prosecuted at all, I think, to the extent that it should have been for marital rape, even after admitting all the things that he had done to her. I just thought it was disgusting, and the judge had said to the wife too, is like, well, you know, I hope you can use this opportunity to forgive him for what he did. Which just made me sick to my stomach. Since 2014, and somebody said that.
Wow.
Well, you know, all those Republican congressmen. What about them? Like, I think one of them said something like, "Oh, how can there be marital rape? You know, if your wife's wearing like a nightie and she's looking really hot, like, how can you help yourself?"
Wow.
Yeah, that was a fairly recent one where he used the word nightie, and it creeped me out a lot.
Really? Who was it?
Yeah.
I haven't heard about that.
I'll have to look it up, but it was super creepy.
I feel like every week something worse comes out of one of their mouths that you didn't think could get any creepier, and it does.
Well, you know, patriarchy is patriarchy. You go anywhere in the world.
That's true.
Oh, here we go. Virginia GOP Congressman candidate. Spousal rape is not a crime if she's wearing a nightie. Virginia State Senator Richard H. quote-unquote Dick Black. Great name.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says, I do not know how you could validly get a conviction of a husband-wife rape when they're living together, sleeping in the same bed, she's in a nightie, and so forth. There's not injuries, there's no separation or anything.
What if? Okay, I don't know if I want to get into that.
No.
Yeah.
That might be a whole nother episode, Hina. We can have you back on. We are running out of time. Actually, we are over time. But if you are willing, I'd like to ask you at least one more question. And I wanted you to talk about any of the misunderstandings Americans have about Islam that we haven't covered yet, and anything you want to clarify.
Gosh, there's so many. I'm writing a whole book on it. A Skeptic's Guide to Islam, which is forthcoming. I'll just keep saying forthcoming for now.
Wonderful.
Yeah, manuscripts are hard. Yeah, no, I'd say the main thing to always understand is that, you know, to treat Islam not as a monolith, but to treat it as full of different kinds of people with different kinds of interpretations. Also, the false parallels with Christianity, I think, are a big pitfall a lot of people fall into. They'll try to compare Muhammad to Jesus, and that's not really how Muslims view their prophet. You know, Muhammad is the messenger, he's not part of God. Really, salvation in Islam is through the Quran. I think the Quran is more equivalent to Jesus than Muhammad.
Okay. And Marwa, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Great. Did you hear the question?
Yeah, I did hear the question.
Great. Do you want to?
Yeah, I mean everything that Hina just said is wonderful. Geez, I would just. It's just that it's just so hard to talk about the misconceptions that people face because you just get into all of these details. But I guess instead of addressing that, I would encourage people to talk to Muslims and find out what they really think, and talk to them not in a way where you already assume that you kind of know what they believe because of things that you've heard and because of these stereotypes and these and in these.
Okay, I guess we lost her again. But also talk to ex-Muslims. We're here. There's ex-Muslims of North America, which Marwa and I both belong to. And even if you just go on Twitter and search the hashtag or word ex-Muslim, you will find a lot of us. So, we're out there. Come say hi. Most of us love talking.
Yeah, I'd like to put some links up of some ex-Muslim organizations, Hina, if you don't mind emailing those to
Absolutely.
me.
I'll send those along with my links as well.
And I just wanted to kind of reiterate too that, anytime you have questions about not just a minority group, but a group that you don't belong to, and you want answers to those questions, just find someone and talk to them. Most of the time, people are very willing to clear up any misconceptions that you have. And I have a really good example, and I know we're going over time, but I have a friend of mine who's black, and there's, as a white American, you get fed a lot of lies about black people. And one of the lies that I was told was regarding cleanliness of a black American, that they don't wash their hair. And I know that's bull, but at the same time, I'm like, all right, where is this coming from? Why, how did this get started? Because usually these kinds of stereotypes or these rumors, I would say, start with some kind of seed of truth. So I got, real comfortable with my friend, and I asked her, this is this weird thing that I've heard other white people say. What is up with that? Why do they say that? And she told me that it's true that they cannot wash their hair every day like we do. Because if they were to wash their hair every day like we do, it would break. It would dry up and break. So they take care of it differently. And a lot of that, taking care of it differently could be seen as not washing by a white person. And something as simple as that, as just kind of talking about, well, what's this washing the hair thing, this thing that I keep hearing that I know it can't be true or just sounds outrageous, tell me about it. And most of the time, people are going to be happy to have that discussion with you, and she was very happy to have that discussion with me.
And even if the particular person you ask isn't interested in talking about it, we have the internet. There are some of us who, that's our thing, is to explain things and talk about things and talk with you about things. So, it's a wonderful, marvelous time we live in for that sort of thing.
Right. And I just think that dialogue is so important. And
oh yeah.
Anyway, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
Oh, we could just go on forever about this, couldn't we? Probably.
Marwa? Is she? Oh, I was kind of hoping that she was there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap it up. And Hina, is there any closing remarks? Anything you want to promote?
Well, Marwa and I will both soon be blogging at Free Thought Blogs, so that's 2 more ex-Muslims there. We've already got a bunch over there, so Free Thought Blogs is kind of becoming another ex-Muslim hub, I guess, in some ways, which is pretty cool because before that, we had our own groups, but it's nice to be out there in sort of more of the mainstream. There's Ex-Muslims of North America, which is a great group. We're growing. Right now we're really limited to social stuff. But, we're planning on expanding as we sort of gain membership and recognition. There's Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. They're amazing. They've been around forever, led by Mariam Namazi. Awesome org.
Great. And then, Marwa, can you hear me? Oh, darn.
No.
I will have her email me anything that she wants promoted, and I can get some links up. Like you said, she is going to Free Thought blogs, and I'm very interested in reading some of what she has written already.
Yeah. She's at Between a Veil and a Dark Place. That's her current. And it's going to be called the same thing at Free Thought Blogs, and she's migrating her archives, I think. So.
Oh, great.
Awesome.
And Amanda?
Well, yeah, same as usual, I guess, would be Prophet Cast. And obviously it's especially exciting to me because it's going to be another all-women's episode next Sunday, so I'm going to be on that. And I'd just like to point out that the last time we did it, it was the most popular episode, the most viewed one. So it's probably a lot of that was thanks to you, Aubrey.
It was
but
fun.
yeah, that's next Sunday at 9:30.
And I need to start doing some promoting myself. I do want to promote Be Secular. I know you can't see my shirt because, well, there's a lot of me. But, you know, here we are, Be Secular, woo! We are, the Godless Family Resource is, I don't know what it's technically called, an affiliate maybe? So you can buy apparel there, and then I get a portion of that purchase, but also it's just a great group. They're doing other things with the money. They're not just pocketing it. They're out doing activism with it. So I think you should definitely go to Be Secular and check them out. And in the next couple of weeks, I'll be promoting Godless Family Resource more. The subscription portion of the website is almost ready to launch, so I'm really excited. And one more time, Marwa, are you there? Okay.
Oh.
Well, thanks everyone for watching. Next week, we are going to be talking about Christianity and kind of getting the basics of Christianity. My goal is to kind of talk about what all of Christianity has in common, and then kind of splinter off into, well, what do progressive Christians think? What are some of those ideas? What are the fundamentalist ideas? And just kind of talk about that. Just like you were saying, Hina, I want to show Christianity as not a monolith, and kind of get that discussion going. And my husband Adam is going to be a guest because he was raised in a Methodist home. And hopefully Amanda's working on getting us a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
An ex-fundamentalist.
A few of them. I'm excited and a little bit frightened.
Well, thank you, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.